Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And this week, we are coming at you with a classic, vintage, aged episode here of Jams and Tea with some of the artists that we're covering, throwing it back to kind of the spring slash summer of 2021, when both of these artists put out some records that were very year defining for us. And now they're back because we have Genesis Owusu himself has returned with his third album, Redstar Woo and the Worldwide Scourge, as well as the latest album from Kentucky black metal band Austin Lunn himself, Panopticon. We have the new Panopticon album, which I will not attempt to pronounce because I'm pretty sure it's Norwegian,
For
or
the Haunted Heart
the
is what
Haunted
it
Heart. Yes, I
translates
pulled
to.
that up here. The Haunted Heart, and a bunch of words with lots of D's and J's in them at the same time that American tongues were not meant to pronounce. Woo! Okay, so let's start off here with Mr. Genesis Owusu, who has been such a fascinating up and comer this decade in music. Honestly, one of the new guys to watch. Ever since he came onto the scene with 2021 Smiling with No Teeth, he has been somebody who the alternative music press has really latched onto, and somebody who we really latched onto because of that debut album. It combined so many different things, flavors of hip hop that spanned from Brockhampton to the Wu-Tang Clan, hints of soul and funk, late era Prince, psychedelic rock, a live band sound that was just absolutely intoxicating. And shout out to that time where Genesis Owusu's dad said that we did a good job of reviewing that album. I will never forget that, nor will I ever stop bringing it up. And of course, he came out with his follow up 2 years later, Struggler, which we did cover in a kind of review roundup when that album came out. And I was a massive fan of Struggler. I liked it even more than Smiling with No Teeth because I absolutely loved the dance punk energy that Genesis brought to this, as it was just this awesome soul infused dance party of a record that was coupled with some really interesting conceptual elements that felt like it had developed from Smiling with No Teeth. So I guess that it's only fitting that on this third album here, Red Star Woo and the Worldwide Scourge, that he kind of continues burrowing into himself, both conceptually and musically, by dipping into some post-punk revival stuff instead of some dance punk stuff like last time. And on this album, we get Genesis Owusu assessing current affairs, really. This is contemporary with a capital C. This is a roundup of what Genesis Owusu seems to observe is the political climate of the United States and how that is affecting him and those around him right now. And Jen, I know you are also additionally a massive fan of Genesis Owusu. You've even seen him live before. So,
I'm rocking my merch
whoa, we're
from the
both
from the
rocking.
Struggler
Wait, you've
tour.
got the Owusu, I've got the Panopticon shirt. Yay! We did it
Yeah.
on theme. But tell me, what exactly were you looking for with Genesis Owusu? Because I was very impressed initially between his first two albums. They have such different core sounds, but such similar appeal. And they're both equally as thoughtful to me. So I don't even really know what I personally expected out of him for a third record. Just more of him being his weird, usual self. But I don't know. This was an album that really kind of snuck up on me, and I was like, wow, I forgot how much I missed this vivid and colorful voice that we've got here.
As I was hearing rapturous acclaim for Genesis Owusu's debut album a few years ago, the old episode of Jams and Tea was the thing that finally convinced me to give it a listen, and I've been a fan of his ever since. So I've been pretty much day one ride or die for Genesis Owusu, and I, like you, love Struggler just as much, if not more, depending on what day you ask me, where I saw some people, namely Riley, find that album a little bit disappointing in
Hmm.
contrast to Smiling with No Teeth. And I suspect I come here again as the Genesis Owusu fan who is just rapturous for every single step that he's taken, whereas I'm afraid that you might be the one a little bit more reserved about this album than me this time around. But what we're getting here on Red Star Woo and the Worldwide Scourge is Genesis Owusu's most explicitly conscious record.
Oh yes.
It is his most enmeshed in present day discourses, where Smiling with No Teeth and Struggler felt like they were speaking to the eternal struggles of blackness and the eternal struggles of just being at the bottom in general. Red Star Woo and the Worldwide Scourge is a very contemporary record. It reminded me of the first time that I listened to Scare in the Hose and was like, oh, we're talking about Elon within the first
Yeah,
minute of the record.
I think we had like what, three Elon mentions on here, which I mean, it was always, Genesis always has his foot right when it comes to that aspect of like politics and such. But I will admit, every time I hear an album mention Elon Musk in any capacity, I do mentally dock it like just a couple of points for making me think about him. So sorry, Genesis. I'll admit that that one's a little bit more on me.
But the uber online presence that Owusu has had, that's really extending into his lyricism for the first time, makes sense considering that this is his attempt to capture the contemporary moment as succinctly as possible, while still bringing or attempting to bring these anthemic post-punk dancey bangers for the revolution. The lead single, Pirate Radio, really brought all of that energy of what this album was going to be. It's a very good choice for a lead single because I really do feel like that song encapsulates a lot of the album's themes as well as its sonic ideas, while still leaving room for a lot of the album's surprises to come later in the track list. But Pirate Radio and the later single Stampede suggested a kind of bridging between the consistent dance punk vibe of Struggler with a return of the more old-fashioned rock and punk influences that made Smiling with No Teeth such a vibrant and wide-ranging album in terms of its aesthetic influences. Like on Stampede, you're getting this great combination of these really subtle drum machines with these really beautiful synth hits with this very bluesy vocal range that he's bringing here. And Red Star Woo and the Worldwide Scourge ends up becoming a very politically conscious record. And I've been thinking about this in conversation with a lot of reggaeton that I've been listening to
Hmm.
recently
I hear
because
that.
I've been getting into Bunny Wailer, who was an associate of Bob Marley and the Wailers, childhood friend of
Ah,
Bob Marley, who had his own solo career. And I've been especially thinking about his album Protest, which was his most politically conscious piece of work, where he was able to use a lot of the melodic qualities of reggaeton to speak more plainly about what was really on his mind as a songwriter. And here I felt like Genesis has been able to accomplish a similar kind of feat, where by resting more on reggaeton and on punk and on conscious hip hop, he's able to be a lot more direct. Whereas Struggler deals a lot in metaphor and a lot in literary analogy. It's got all these
yep.
Kafkaisms and influences from Metamorphosis, along with this overarching narrative of a descent into hell that reads as very Dante influenced,
Hmm.
but it isn't as much getting on the political pulse that's inspiring the aesthetic. Whereas I feel like the Worldwide Scourge is much more influenced by the current political environment as a thematic idea. Take the song Most Normal American Voter, which
One of the best song titles of the year, no doubt.
yeah, great song title for a song that really tries to get inside the mind of the person that seems to frustrate Genesis so much on the other side of the screen. And I just love the reckless, wiry vocal performance that he brings to this song
The
about trying to
the missing
embody.
information, combining it quickly to make it misinformation. Very, very clever. Very good stuff.
Yeah. And I love the really old-fashioned rock and roll influenced vocals on that chorus as well. The way his vocal harmonies are directed feels like a classic 60s rock or blues cut. But what I really wanted to hone in on with Red Star Woo and the Worldwide Scourge is his leaning on reggaeton and R&B, which is really new for Genesis. And what that allows him to bring to the table is that he's made a protest album that's also a love letter to the protest and the
Yeah,
protesters,
I would say that's true.
where on songs like Hellstar and on Falling Both Ways, there are moments here where he's able to create this space for communal rest and reverence because Hellstar really feels like a moment where he's not just trying to inspire the people who aren't in it to get with it like he is on songs like Stampede, but it's a moment where he, as the musician and as the artist, is performing a kind of act of care almost for the listener, where Hellstar and Falling Both Ways both, and there are other moments like this on the record, are very much about songs where you're extending warmth to the movement and extending this want to be a respite from the struggle, which is an important part of the struggle, is carving out spaces to find respite from the struggle and be reckless in your rest and in occasionally a bit of hedonism that comes along with the rest, like the songs that lean a little bit more on the, come chew on the meat of the revolution or whatever that line is in Hellstar. He's saying something about like "come squeeze me" or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
It's a very confessional record about how Genesis just like can't help but feel this way about some of these things. Like the moment on the Worldwide Scourge where I realized I was listening to a very confessional record is when he just all of a sudden says, "I ain't above celebrating the death of an abuser." I was just
Yes.
like, not only are we attempting to make something, for the struggle and attempt to articulate the struggle, but we're also admitting to some negative impulses that being in the struggle can bring out of you, where even as you feel justified, you can lead yourself down these really bad trains of thought that aren't all that productive.
No.
The thing is that I know people like this. I've met people like this before, where you start to have these fantasies about big climactic turns in historical narratives that
Hmm.
are not as easy as they seem
The
and
people who
don't
really want their
immediately.
moment to give the Aaron Sorkin speech to solve all of the problems and own all of the bad guys and me too, man.
Yeah, and the problem is that the Aaron Sorkin speech doesn't do that, and we've known that for
Nope.
a long time. But the thing that a lot of revolutionary movements come to accept or come to learn in retrospect is that the death of the tentpole figure, regardless of how that comes to pass, is not an easy victory and it's not an
No.
easy pivot. There's more to it than that. And so it really becomes much more about, or what I really think is the key lyric of this album. You got to fight for the ones you love, not to kill the people that you hate. You got to fight to save yourself. And
Paging
again on
Ryan
Hellstar.
Johnson's The Last Jedi.
Oh God. But again
Just
on
in case this
Hellstar, one
wasn't
of my
politically incendiary enough. People know what we're about.
Well, then again on Hellstar, I think a key lyric in company of that, you got to save yourself from who you are. I seen that poison in your eyes. And I think this album does a really good job at addressing how we get poisoned. The things
Hmm.
that radicalize our enemies also radicalize us in the other direction. Just because we lean one way politically doesn't mean that the machinations by which we're all encouraged to direct our anger at the bottom, which is another recurring theme on this
Yep.
album, just because we have our political heads on straight, whether you want to agree with that sentiment or not, doesn't mean that you're pointing all that well put together thought in the right direction.
You can
And
watch 1,000 video essays, but that's not gonna make you a better revolutionary partner.
yeah, and I mean, listening to reggaeton all day does not make you a revolutionary fighter either. But all of this is to say, and to start actually trying to review this album for a second, I like this album a lot. It's probably still my least favorite Genesis Owusu album, but that's still a very, very, very high bar in my respects. And what I most appreciated about this was it's the way in which its softness, even in a lot of its
Yeah,
hardest songs, lends itself to its thematic complexities. Like, I don't think this album would be as effective thematically if it sounded more intense. There are moments
yeah,
where
I agree.
even its highest pace, highest octane moments are more reserved than they could be. Like, having soft drum machines on songs like Stampede, or leaning on elegant orchestral vocal harmonies, or having these vibrant synths and these big whispered choruses like on the song Big Dog. There's
Yeah,
a reservation to this album that makes even its most hype moments feel more reserved and more well thought out and more well planned to present the energy of the moment while conserving the energy of the performer and the performance itself. And it's a tightrope that I think is really interesting. And so it might not lead to this album being the most intense thing ever, but it's a consistent experience, especially for an album that is oscillating back and forth between, very intense conscious hip hop, preachy rock and reggaeton. Those softer moments have to be complemented by a softness in the faster, stronger, harsher moments of the record. And I think Genesis balances that really, really well. And that makes this a really interesting piece of work. Where, yeah, I think the influences of the post-punk revival and the neo-soul influences of this record really help it keep its head on straight, where the lyrical content kind of wanders a bit.
mhm.
The aesthetic consistency makes these differing thematic journeys feel more carefully placed and sequenced. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a weird one for me because, well, I mean, to put it bluntly, the criticisms I have to levy against this album are boring. They're really boring, and I kind of hate that because I do like this album overall. I think it's good, and I think it's good for a lot of subtle and nuanced reasons that make me more upset that I'm not fully on board with it because, like, from a writing standpoint, he really does kind of walk that tightrope, like you said. He really balances on the edge of a knife between being so blunt, stream of consciousness, and just confessional, like you said, and really kind of, getting into the nitty-gritty of some really dense socio-political stuff. And I think he does it really well. Like normally when you swerve and shift gears this hard, there's some growing pains. But Genesis's emphasized delivery has always been good and malleable enough for stuff like this. And it kind of feels like we are dialing it back a little bit because, like, Riley's main criticism with something like Struggler was that the production kind of felt a little bit dry. It didn't quite have that live band sound that the debut had. And I didn't quite have that problem. I do have that problem a little bit here, if I'm honest, because it feels like we've kind of found a middle ground between the instrumental diversity of the first album and the production style of the second. And a lot of the instrumentals on here in the more high octane moments, they always lack a little bit of something to me. Which is why I end up conversely really getting on board with the lower key moments on here, which I didn't really expect at all. Like the slower and even more like meditative borderline stuff is where I'm more on board. But that doesn't mean to say that everything is like a miss or anything. Like Death Cult Zombie, for example, the pitched up guitar lead on this combined with the very rhythmic delivery, like let's call this what it is. This is a soul tinged early 9 Inch Nails song and it knocks. It's fun as hell. It's Nine Inch Nails flavored ska soul punk. Like, how can you not love that? That's so much fun. And it also gets at that kind of hive mind mentality that where we live, we had an election here recently, so things like the stuff in this song are constantly on my mind. And most normal American voter also is very much in that same vein. And, like, again, all of these observations, they're hardly new, but they are even at their most inelegant, incredibly cathartic to hear him talk about, just because he's got this on the ground view. Again, it's kind of like Isaiah Rashad last week, where it's like this is the point of view for somebody who is like he may not be in the shit, but he's close enough to be able to write about it with some accuracy. And the confessional aspects of this album to me are its strongest. It's why the Worldwide Scourge is probably my favorite song on here, because this is just a very simple, almost like Genesis airing his own grievances with America, with the leftist movement, with like everything right now. And you know what? Again, just listening to this, I feel a lot of overwhelming catharsis in it, and the conviction that he delivers it with is strong. And there are moments where he leans into the confessional side to the point where I really respect it. Like, there's a part where he talks about, like, he speaks up on the fact that, he's been watching, Gaza being bombed for however long now and nobody doing goddamn anything about it, and how terrible and awful it is, and how that's also made him kind of react in a way that he's sort of speaking on and calling out other people for on this, of just like, I am also finding myself getting caught up in the fact that I'm like, looking at Jewish people twice because I don't trust them because of what this has happened. Like, it's letting it infect me. And it's like that's a fascinating perspective to see held, just because there's always been lots of tension in hip hop and hip hop adjacent music between like the black community and the Jewish community. Please go watch Little Bill's video on Zionism and hip hop. It's very, very interesting and very, very informative. I recommend it highly. But him sort of externalizing this sort of cultural bias that he has as a result of newfound conflict is very interesting, just because it feels like he's bringing about a topic that has been relevant for a very long time, and being like, here's where this puts us right now and where it puts me right now, and how dangerous it is because it can make me fall victim to the same things I'm railing against. And it's like that takes a very, very deep, honest level of self-reflection to actually come out and admit. And I kind of respect him for it. I think that that's a really interesting like admission to make known. And it's why this frustrates me so much, because the instrumentals on here just don't really carry the same weight as the words do on here. I hate to be the guy. I hate to be the guy, but it is kind of the mixing. Some of these instrumentals, they're a bit too blown out, they're a bit too compressed, and they kind of take away the dynamism that I really love from Genesis. Like, the thing is with Struggler is that I can understand why someone would have the complaint that that album is a little bit drier than the debut, but I still think it has enough impact, it has enough rhythm, it has enough momentum that that doesn't necessarily really matter to me. And the electronic production sounds fucking fantastic anyway, so I don't particularly care. There's a bit more give and take with analog and digital instrumentation on here, which is fine. But again, some of these instrumentals, they lose their structural dynamism that I loved so much about his first two albums. Some of them just kind of bury the subtleties of the mix in the really big synth lines, the very crunchy electronic stuff. And I do feel like that means that the album suffers a little bit musically, really a lot more in its first half than its second. I think the second half is actually a lot more consistent. I think it kind of comes to a much more conclusive final third where it all really ties together with like Situations onward. And like Situations in general is a fantastic example of Genesis kind of slowing down the pace and kind of engaging you in ways that the first half of the album is setting you up for. It is a very thoughtfully structured album. And I mean, we do have contributions from people like singer Duckworth on Hellstar, which, by the way, if that's a Hellstar Ramina reference, based as fuck, you are exactly the kind of nerd who would do that, Genesis, and I applaud you for doing it. I'm maybe one of the 9 people who will even catch that, so kudos.
I'm gonna
But
say I've also read Hellstar Remina, so
oh,
if that's there, hell yeah.
woo! Is that the only Ito you've read, or have you read more?
That's it. I've only
Oh,
read Remina.
okay. Interesting. Anywho, but that's the thing is that this album is really just it's one that has all of its ducks in a row, and I can't even necessarily say that my complaints are flaws. It's really more just preferences of what I look for with Genesis's stuff. It is a good album, and in every way possible, it is thoughtful and it is well put together, and it is well worth hearing. It is just, it kind of finds the awkward middle ground of his insanely wide sound palette for me specifically. This does not derail my excitement for Genesis's work whatsoever. If anything, it makes me more excited because on a conceptual level, he just keeps getting more interesting. Like that whole thing he has with the black dog on his first album and how he elaborates on that concept, and the
Mhm.
Kafka-esque stuff in the second one, and the Dante's Inferno parallels. And this too, it's like it does really feel like Genesis Owusu is a guy who is here to stay. And I love that because he feels like such a breath of fresh air that even when he's underwhelming me, he's still underwhelming me better than anyone else is, if you know what I'm saying.
I feel much more positively on this album, I think, than you do. I think it's a much more consistent affair. And I wonder if, I think part of the reason why the move to more electronic production doesn't bother me as much is because I did see him live, and that was all with a track behind him.
I would love to
And so
see how these play live.
I can understand why in production he might lean more on digital drums, break beats. There's a great breakbeat
Great
drum
break beat on this
on,
album. So
yeah,
good.
great, especially on which song is it? I wrote it down. On Life Keeps
Life keeps
Going. There's a
going.
great breakbeat drum on that that drew me into that song immediately.
That shit's
Um,
that break beat, like if you broke it apart so that it was a little less like statically rhythmic, it would sound like a fucking Autechre beat. It's kind of fucking based. It rocks.
yeah, and so you're mixing this breakbeat stuff with like a song that sounds like Joy Division, which
Yeah, a little bit. It sounds like something off of Closer.
but I really love this Genesis Owusu record. For me, it's three for three. So big thumbs up from me.
Slightly more hesitant thumbs up for me. Is this the first, like, is this the closest we've come to disagreeing all year? I think it
I
might
think
be. I think it might be.
I think it is.
Shit. But like I'm not even disagreeing. I'm still like I still think this is a really good album that everybody should try, but you know, maybe alter your expectations depending on what you're expecting from Genesis's sound explicitly, but I mean like this dude is still one of the guys to watch right now in terms of decade defining artist. Ironically enough, it's like Genesis Owusu and Paranul are kind of the two I think of when I think about the ones that have defined the new music that I've sought after this decade the most, and that remains
Ooh.
true. I very much hope that I continue seeing the new facets of this dude unfold because with these three albums, you kind of feel like a slightly different person made each of them, and that feels like a real treat, especially in a world where there are artists who are just permanently stagnant or dropping three massive albums all at once that nobody gives a fuck about. That's aimed at anybody in particular. There's a reason we're talking about these two this week. So now let's move on to Panopticon, Kentucky, formerly based metal band, primarily fronted by one Mr. Austin Lund. Panopticon has been kicking since the late 2000s, roughly, but it wasn't until their album Kentucky that they were really brought into the kind of new black metal scene that the online space was really fostering, that was brought up by bands like Agalloch, for instance, the kind of post-metal movement. Even bands like Neurosis are partially responsible for bands like Panopticon taking off. So that album came out in 2012, and it was known for its really fascinating combo of traditional bluegrass and folk music and atmospheric black metal, as well as combining real life audio from protests captured in Kentucky about the coal mining industry that happened in eastern Kentucky a long time ago. And so Austin's kind of roots as a native Kentuckian have always been within this music. And from all I can tell, seeing as I am an avid Panopticon fan who has consumed their entire discography many times over, I can only assume that will remain the case because it's that way with every single record. These are very naturalistic and nature-oriented albums that reflect on man's place within the world and environmentalism, and can even dabble into the outright explicitly political, like on the 2018 album, The Scars of Man on the Once Nameless Wilderness, a certified Jake 10 out of 10. Panopticon have three of those right now: Autumn Eternal, Scars of Man, and Again Into the Light, which was our album of the year on this channel in 2021, an album that all of us absolutely adored, and also one of my 10 favorite albums of all time, probably my favorite metal album ever at this point. I listen to Rope Burn Exit so often still, just because I love that riff so fucking much, man. But I won't lie, a lot of my, identity as somebody who comes from rural Kentucky has been tied into this band, and I've seen a lot of experiences and particular things spoken on in this music that I have not seen talked about or covered in this way or with this level of elegance elsewhere. So it's kind of made me feel a little seen as somebody who does not get to feel a lot of pride in where they are from very often. But Panopticon, frankly, they might be the best metal band working today. And I really mean that because every 2 or 3 years, Austin will drop an album that will be a year highlight without fail. Kentucky in 2012, Roads to the North in 2014, Autumn Eternal in 2015, Scars of Man in 2018, and again 2021, The Rhyme of Memory, which we also covered in 2023. And now we have the new record in 2026. And boy, I wish I had something new to say about this fucking band, man. I wish I could come here and tell you something that I haven't told you about the last two new Panopticon albums we reviewed. Because what can I say? This is another masterful turn from Austin. But I can say there are a lot of things that I think make this album stand out from previous Panopticon records. For instance, this record kind of ends a streak that Austin was going on, dabbling into a production style that was way harsher, way more just like strangled and just nasty sounding. I'm talking like traditional black metal type of stuff, like actual like Transylvanian hunger level of lo-fi black metal production. And this created a really interesting friction in his music that divided some people on big double albums like The Scars of Man, which really pushed the boundaries of what you could even consider audibly legible for black metal, but it wormed its way into my heart very, very deeply. And Again Into the Light is also a very crusty sounding album, but it is an album that is about pulling yourself from the muck. It is about being embroiled in grime, seeing something ahead of you, and clawing tooth and nail to get there. Something that's very omnipresent about Austin's music is that he does not include lyrics for these songs. You kind of just have to either intuit it, read it somewhere, find somebody to actually do it, get the liner notes or whatever, which again, I know some people have a problem with that, but in this day and age, I appreciate when an artist kind of takes an extra effort to make you work for it, like just a little bit, because it engages you a little more. Which leads me to discovering that this album is kind of a quasi-concept album about a man wandering throughout this sort of eternal forest and recalling memories from his childhood and nostalgia and ultimately confronting the concept of death at the very end of it as part of this cyclical cycle of nature. And yeah, that's a very Panopticon-esque concept to pair with what this is. But that lo-fi production style is not really here. This is the cleanest sounding Panopticon album that's been released since 2015's Autumn Eternal, which was a way more like black and death metal kind of fusion that was a little bit more like if you ask me where to start with this band, I'll tell you Autumn Eternal. It's kind of the easiest to latch onto. It's the most kind of legible, but it's also the most impactful. It's going to hit you the hardest. But this album here, after an album like The Rhyme of Memory, which continued in that trend and was similarly masterful, a year highlight that year, this time around, though, we see Austin dabbling in, of all things, symphonic black metal, which I never would have called because symphonic black metal is a very specific kind of black metal that honestly doesn't have the greatest reputation. It has a lot of notoriety for being a very overproduced genre, a genre that is kind of relies a little bit on spectacle over substance, perhaps, and leads to a lot of people just not particularly engaging with it. But with the texture, acumen, and production of a band like Panopticon, they can take that template and work miracles with it because the sort of looming idea that has been building up throughout these last three albums, which are technically of at peace with one another as a kind of trilogy, the sort of encroaching omnipresence of strings. In the last two records, we've had strings be more of a core component of the sound, but I wouldn't say that they developed into full-blown arrangements. They were kind of measures, accents, flourishes. Here, on the other hand, these are woven into these compositions. These are vast movements that evolve and, compress and then spread back out again and feel alive while you listen to them. There are moments where the guitars on here sound way more lively than they've sounded on the past couple Panopticon records. Like, there are some moments on here where you're just like, holy Judas Priest, my guy, you are playing that really fucking fast. And it kind of fucking slams. And yeah, I mean, no surprise, I'm kind of head over heels for this. And it starts off, admittedly, in a place with Woodland Caribou, a song that is very Panopticon type beat, but like it's like when your type beat is at worst an A minus. Can I even really complain? But then afterwards, this album just kind of keeps showing you something new. We're getting way more kind of vocal harmonies, both with some female gang vocals combined with some of Austin's vocals. And some of Austin's vocals are more pronounced in these mixes than they literally ever have been before. Like without any layering whatsoever. I mean, unadorned. And those moments are very vulnerable. Like there are moments where he's not even like screaming, he's just kind of singing, and it feels like his throat has been worn ragged by screaming so much. And it adds this tangible push and pull to the energy of the album. I love the way that it kind of segues between sort of the string heavy sections, the vocal harmony sections, and then it'll collide them together in these kind of vast euphoric explosions like on Blood and Fur Upon the Melting Snow, which fucking like if you don't listen to Panopticon and like go out in nature or go for a drive while listening to, you are missing the fuck out because experiencing it literally, in the wild or as close to that as you can, it's absolutely unbelievable. I had a hell of a week at work this past week, getting run ragged for just 1,000 different reasons. And when I left this morning, I played this in my car going down the highway, and it felt like I was escaping the apocalypse. It was so fucking sick. I felt like I was riding with the fucking Valkyries into battle, and it ruled. And I mean, like, you've got other moments on here that are, again, a little bit more typical of Panopticon, but also, like, lean and mean and fast, like the White Cedars. And then you have the big, long, epic, prosaic kind of songs like A Culture of Wilderness and Ghost Eyes in the Firelight, which are some of the best pieces of music this band have ever made, particularly Ghost Eyes in the Firelight, which is just, oh man, I've got chills just thinking about it.
Ooh.
It nails everything it goes for, in my opinion. And thus I have a very uncomplicated and mildly uninteresting take on this being just another masterful effort from a guy who pitches nothing but heat.
So I am not the well-read Panopticon fan that you are, but I am a huge fan of And Again Into the Light. It's one of my favorite albums of its
Taste.
era, genre notwithstanding. I think it's a wonderful record. It's still up there with some of my favorite of the entire decade. And so returning to Panopticon with The Haunted Heart, I didn't know what to expect. But when I start Woodland Caribou and you get this
Mhm.
field noise, and I'm telling you, the introduction of the strings in this
Oh,
just completely blew me away, along with
yes.
these shrill synths and kind of compressed drums. It all
Yeah.
really surprised me. And yeah, like you said, Austin's voice is really low in the mix, but with this kind of instrumental arrangement, it gives it a really different feel to it.
Hmm.
With it gives it a very different kind of atmosphere that suits its more conceptual narrative framework about this kind of mythological figure wandering through this fantastical landscape. And the transition from all that, from the strings
Hmm.
and the synths and the quieter drums to the big guitars and the staccato string hits, it all creates this feeling of this character being at the peak of the death drive, which I think is a really
Hmm.
interesting concept that this album explores, both for its central speaker and for the world that the album takes place in, because there's a lot of writing on this about the cyclical nature and the death and rebirth of all forms of life, whether intelligent or the nature that intelligence finds itself enmeshed within and having to coexist with and having to think about the ramifications of, because it doesn't feel a connection to the things that are as tangible as it. There's a lot of writing in here about plants and saplings and trees and skeletons and dead bark and dead leaves. And it's a very isolated feeling that this album gets into, even as it's about so much life. It's about feeling isolated, surrounded by all of this life. And so I think it's really interesting that this album and its movements resemble different emotional tenors for the central character and the central narrative. Like The Great Silence Extinct has all
Hmm.
these really hard and fast drums, and this is another place where the aesthetic blend of the symphonic black metal with the more atmospheric black metal really comes together, because there's this, I love the third verse, this one string solo that's kind of
Oh,
really forward in the mix with everything
yes.
else kind of blanketing it, that I loved the sound of, especially with
Mm.
the more pronounced lyrics and the more pronounced singing on that part of the song. Because yeah, like you said, there's more of an emphasis on the vocals on this than there is on anything in And Again Into the Light, which I think is really interesting and makes this album feel more of a tone poem than an atmospheric black metal
Hmm.
at many, many points, which is again where I think that symphonic influence shows itself. Really, this is a post-apocalyptic opera through black metal
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yes, absolutely.
by focusing on not just vocals but character in the
Hmm.
vocals, drawing portraits. It reminded me of the Ruby Chord, the Richard Dawson album that we talked about a few years
Ooh.
ago.
I feel like somewhere out there, Riley's just like, huh? Richard Dawson, Panopticon, what? But no, I completely agree with you. And I think that honestly, it's an achievement that I find more impressive the more I think about it, because when you take a look at the two main sort of genre kind of templates that we're working with here, you've got black metal and you got symphonic metal. These are two polar opposite ends of a genre in heavy music. Symphonic metal is all about opulence. It's all about density. It's about being big. It's about being loud. It's about being clear. It's about being, to some extent, overproduced. Black metal is about working with almost nothing. It's about working with tools that are faulty or sound faulty or lo-fi, and it's scratchy and gnarled and ugly and just it's nasty. Combining them together like this should not work. But with the way that it does it, it just kind of combines them in equal measures so that it fills out everything. It doesn't really ever feel like these two things are fighting each other. It feels like they're segueing, weaving in and out of each other instead. These movements are careful. They are so distinct, and I end up just really getting swept up in this album so easily. It is, frankly, if you were to ask me where you should start with this band, I think I might tell you this record now, because I do think it kind of gives you a better idea for the breadth of their sound, and it's kind of them at their most accessible. I don't feel like the sound is going to be as much of a potential turnoff as it was on those last two records, which, as much as I love them, I can completely understand someone listening to them and just being like, yeah, unless I'm, wearing a $300 pair of headphones and listening to the FLAC files on my laptop, this really isn't going to do it. That being said, if you could track down the FLAC files of this album, this shit uncompressed will lay you flat. And it will also remind you that Austin Lunn, quietly one of the best working guitarists. There is way more of an emphasis on distinct guitar phrases in these songs than just like normal black metal tremolo picking, which he's fucking great at, mind you. But whenever he actually like really sinks into some of these riffs, which has gotten more and more of a bigger element of Austin's compositions this decade, oh, I'm such a sucker for it. Like, this album played me like a fiddle, and I loved it. It maybe has some of the least kind of folky influences that I've heard in a Panopticon album
Yeah,
as of
you don't
late.
really get any of the Americana influence that defines so much of And Again Into the Light until
Yes.
the last track, which ties the album back into And Again Into the Light.
And that, that could be a turnoff for some Panopticon fans. It may be a way to get into it with other people who find that combination weird or off-putting. But I do think that that influence is not necessarily missed on this album. Everything new that it goes for, it does so well. I don't really miss any aspect of prior Panopticon for current Panopticon. And as a development, it's kind of doubly satisfying just because I kind of want to take some time to listen to all the albums in this trilogy like sequentially, just so I can see like how that progression feels. Because when I think about these last three albums, I do kind of tie them to a sort of mental narrative that they have in themselves. Like, you have this very linear part in And Again Into the Light of just, pulling yourself out from the dirt. And then in the album that follows that, it's about weathering the most intense snowstorm imaginable. And this is like finally getting to experience the thaw of winter becoming spring. And it's like, oh, I love that. I love that progression. I love being able to kind of have this sort of seasonal chart with these records. And it feels like that's kind of what he's going for, because he's always been like this heavily, conservational sort of naturist dude. And it's just kind of cool that music like this in that vein is being made. It's like, it's super badass hippie music. And I fuck with that heavy, naturally.
What I think really draws me to Panopticon is those aesthetic contrasts that we have been
Yes.
talking about. Things that draw a lot of people away from this band, but
Hmm.
really, I find their music more interesting when it's more discordant between
Yes.
Americana and the atmospheric stuff on And Again Into the Light, and on this, I shouldn't even call it discordant because it all feels so natural and it all comes together so well. But the symphonic stuff mixed with the traditional atmospheric black metal stuff could turn some people off, but for me, I think they're perfectly immersed. And if anything, the contrast in the production styles on
Oh, oh no. Oh no. They froze. Jen, come back.
yeah, so let me finish my point that I was trying to
Yes.
make with this. The contrasting genre influences on this are integrated in a way that's much more naturally harmonic and even to my ears at least sits theoretically closer to each other than the bluegrass laden heartland rock stuff on And Again Into the Light. But I think the differences in the mixing and the production between the two core elements of this give this album a fantastical tone
Oh
that I
yeah.
think suits the songwriting exceptionally well. I love the way that the mixing of the strings and the guitars, like the dynamism of it, doesn't really make concrete sense, but it evokes a feeling, right?
Hmm.
There's no way that you're going to hear these instruments in this arrangement with that kind of dynamism live without a
Yeah.
lot of manipulation in sound systems. But when you're hearing it like this, it's giving you this kind of liminal, unreal feeling that contributes to a lot of what the album is talking about with these grand cycles of death and rebirth that go for this fairy tale quality that And Again Into the Light doesn't necessarily have.
And just to shout this one aspect out, just because I do think it is maybe the most consistently impressive thing about this band, is that I need to shout out the kind of secret second member of this band and also the secret weapon that has made these past couple of albums what they are, and that is Spencer Morris, who is Austin's associate who does the mixing and mastering of these records, who has accomplished nothing short of miracles with the last couple of Panopticon albums. But this one specifically, it's kind of like he's got to prove that he can do something that he hasn't done in like 10 years. And it's like he's been doing it this entire time. Like he's basically proven that he can both adhere to and break all rules of what music like this should sound like and make it feel like it was supposed to be that way the entire time, no matter what. So, shout out to Spencer Morris for fucking absolutely knocking it out of the park. And shout out to Austin for delivering yet another fucking year highlight masterpiece. I mean, like, I'm serious when I say I don't really know for certain what my album of the year even is right now, but it's between like four incredibly solid contenders, and this is one of them. So you'll be hearing about this motherfucker again come December.
Please give this album a listen. Huge thumbs up to
If you need to get
Panopticon.
into this band, please, literally never been a better time. Like, I'm serious when I say that in my eyes, Panopticon are where Agalloch were maybe 10 years ago as the kind of folk atmospheric black metal sort of title holders. And now that they've kind of waned a little bit, I feel like Panopticon are carrying that mantle and doing a damn fine job at doing it. So, absolutely, two thumbs way, way, way up. So, if you enjoyed these reviews, if you enjoyed these albums, or if you didn't enjoy these reviews or these albums, tell us why in the comments below. Talk about what you're listening to, maybe what you want to hear us talk about in the future. Who knows? We might pay attention. But as always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Visa, everywhere you want to be.